Thank you, everyone. I hope you had a delicious lunch. Wasn't it absolutely beautiful? Thank you very much, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that break today. There is a lot of content to get through. I'm enjoying every second of it. It is now my absolute pleasure to welcome four powerhouses to the stage for what is going to be a fantastic conversation about financial empowerment for women. We have Rachel Young, partner of Giant Leap. Please welcome to the stage. Nicola Roxan, chair of Hester Board. Cathy Scalzo, deputy chair at Australians Investing in Women. And our moderator this afternoon, Georgie Williams, the chair of UN Women Australia. Over to you, Georgie.
Thank you so much. Okay, welcome everybody live into the room finally. Apologies for so much remote content, but when you get access to the kind of women that we've had access to, it's really hard to make an apology for that, right? They were some incredible women. So these three women in front of us, we're really fortunate to have in Victoria. And they have very varied perspectives on the business world. And so what I thought we would open with is just by asking them a question around women-led businesses and how they contribute. And maybe, Rachel, we could start with you, because you have a key role, and maybe you can explain a bit more about this, in seeking out funding and promoting women-led businesses. I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, so we invest in companies that are changing the world. So they need to solve a social or environmental problem across three themes: climate, health, empowerment and education. And really, we back the best and brightest founders. So to be clear, we are also looking for strong financial returns for our investors. We are fund managers doing that. And it just so happens that 60% of the companies we've backed are women-led businesses. So we see a huge opportunity there in the growth of these businesses, not only from an impact perspective, but from a revenue and growth perspective. And the data actually says that women-led businesses outperform. So women-led businesses on average generate 12% higher revenues annually, with a third less capital than their male counterparts. So less money in, more money out. Seems like a bit of a no-brainer. So huge opportunity there. And on top of that, another opportunity, I think, is the fact that if women and men participated equally as entrepreneurs, global GDP would rise by 6%. And so that's US $5 trillion. So everybody wins by backing women.
Sensational. And so that's a bit about the opportunity set in that sector. What about the risks of not backing women? Because obviously you're exposed to that as well.
Yeah, so I think the risks are that the startups of today are the big businesses of tomorrow. So to give you another data point, last year in Australia, 82% of all funding or venture capital raised went to male-only businesses. So not a single woman on the founding team in those businesses, 82% of capital. So if we're funding businesses from the ground up that are only run by men, how do we expect the gender pay gap to close? How do we expect the situation in society to improve for women and for opportunities to open up for women if we're only backing male-founded startups? So there's a huge risk there, and I think that is compounding as those businesses scale.
Okay, thanks for that. I'm going to move on to you, Cathy, if that's okay, because you back women's businesses in Australia, but right across the region. You've got a view firsthand into the impact that they're having, and maybe you'd like to elaborate a bit on that.
Yeah, thank you, Georgie. Well, the problem that Rachel's identified in Australia around that lack of funding for women-led businesses is exacerbated even more when you're dealing with businesses that might be founded by women, solving really important social and environmental problems, but those women are finding themselves in a really challenging environment to get finance because they are in emerging markets. So in the Global South, the Pacific, Africa, for example. And one of the organisations that I'm involved with, YGAP's trying to solve that problem by trying to provide loan capital to these women. And it's interest-free loans, as well as a whole lot of business support to help them grow their businesses and to then drive really strong impact. And I think the best way I can explain why that's so important is to give you an example. And we've got somebody in the room today that YGAP is supporting who I would like to highlight, and that is Angela Adero. And she runs an organisation, a company called Rio Fish in Kenya. And the business is a really clever business that is helping people who are involved in aquaculture in Kenya to run their businesses much more competitively. So she helps through technology and processes to improve their market access, improve their supply chains, and in doing that, she then enables those Kenyan businesses to be much more competitive against the imported product, grow jobs and so on. But the really fantastic, neat thing she does, because she is a woman and she's focusing on this issue, is by doing that, she's helping to solve another problem. And that problem is in Kenya, in the fishing industry, there's an enormous amount of sexual exploitation that goes on because access to these fish markets is so limited that women are forced to provide sexual favours in exchange for having access to this economic opportunity. But by working with these women, Rio Fish eliminates that problem by ensuring that those women are able to run competitive businesses and don't need to make themselves available sexually in order to provide for themselves and their family. And I give that example because I think it gives some colour to the fact there are thousands of businesses like that around the world run by women that can't access finance, and when they can't grow and they can't have the kind of impact we would like them to have.
I think that's a really, really important example because I know even in our Pacific region, UN Women works very strongly alongside DFAT around some of our regional partners to do exactly that as well. And there's some of the most fundamentally important work that we do. But even onshore, if I take Nicola, you're chair of a couple of organisations in the financial services industry specifically. So as chair, but also female-led CEOs that not only have a really important role in finance, but also in advocacy. And I'm really interested in you elaborating on what role that has to play in female-led businesses as well.
Yeah, thank you. And great to hear sort of snapshots from different parts of the system. And obviously as a chair of HESTA, you know, a big institutional investor, but different from many of the other super funds, but similar in some ways that there's institutional capital there that can invest in these projects. And the more information, access, advisors, examples you have, then the easier it is for those organisations to invest. What I love as the chair of an organisation that has a female CEO and has been, and shout out, there are I think a couple of tables of HESTA people here, thank you. But I think that having as part of our purpose to be gutsy advocates for women and for our members means that we're actively seeking out those sorts of examples. Our primary obligation is we must look after the retirement funds of our members and we must get excellent returns. But we know that the evidence now tells us that actually businesses that have women on their boards, you know, the sorts of examples you've been giving, actually perform better. So we're in this happy place where an important social outcome is actually delivering better economic outcomes, which means our members get that benefit as well as the sort of social change that we can advocate for. So I love seeing the deliberate, purposeful, do the businesses we invest in have women? Do we advocate for them in their senior leadership, not just on the boards? Do we look at what their strategies of employment are? Because we actually think good labour conditions, and you've used the most dramatic example, one can make a business successful, but a problem can also destroy that business. So I think understanding that it's not just some distant economic metric, it's actually managing people well, understanding those opportunities, seeing how that turns into a social benefit and a financial benefit. And so it's great. I think the fact that Debbie is one of the few CEOs of super funds around the country is doing it differently, and we at the board are trying to support that as well, which is very exciting.
I think that leads on to where I want to go next, to be honest, which is, I raised in my speech earlier a couple of statistics around financial literacy that I actually think are really frightening. The idea that 7% of the wealth gap between men and women in Australia is just down to literacy. That's women understanding and feeling confident about using money, about buying product in the money space and investing. And that half of all women in Australia aren't financially literate. And I went on to look at more statistics that said, I look at this room, we are incredibly lucky, but more than half of Australian women don't know what superannuation is for specifically. That's what the purpose of superannuation is for. They cannot articulate that. They know it's later in life. It certainly expands after you're 50. You certainly become aware, but that's a real problem. If you don't know in your 20s what you need to be working for, it's a massive problem. So I wanted to move on to financial literacy. And Cathy, you work with underprivileged communities specifically. What impact do you see the literacy gap having on the ground?
I think maybe 2018 was the last time there was any sort of surveying of PISA data for students around their financial literacy, which says something in itself that we don't always engage in the financial literacy part of PISA. But I think it showed a massive gap in financial literacy between students that were economically advantaged and those that were socioeconomically disadvantaged. And they had much less access, socioeconomically disadvantaged students, to any form of financial education whatsoever, and had really low confidence about engaging with finances. So the gap starts when people are at school, and the gap just keeps growing and growing. And there's lots of different examples, but you can see that some of the main ones that we probably all aware of are people being taken advantage of. Vulnerable people are preyed on through financial products and things that are made available in the market. We saw that through some of the banking and finance royal commissions where First Nations community members, for example, had been offered insurance products that were not fit for purpose. Cyber fraud is rife. We all know it. We're all kind of subjected to that risk every day. But if you've got really poor financial literacy, that makes you even more vulnerable. And I suppose the other example I always think about is women in situations of family violence and the whole piece around coercive control. And women are starting so much further back if they've got no kind of financial literacy at all to rely on in really difficult circumstances like that.
Yeah, it does frighten me a lot, because I think knowing that women are behind the 8 ball early on with financial literacy, by the time you do understand quite clearly that you need to catch up, the methods and means that you will take to catch up do actually open women up to more schemes at that point in time, which is difficult. Nicola, what do you think we should all be doing and cognisant of doing to bridge that gap?
Yeah, look, I think that you're going to have to bear with me a little bit on this, because my call out is I actually think when we look back 50 years and had the sexual revolution, that was a lot of kind of lifting the mystique. We have to be able to talk about this. Women have to be able to be in control of their own bodies. They have to be able to demand healthy relationships and think it's okay to talk about sex and it being satisfying, whatever range of other things goes with it. You weren't expecting this at the lunch, I know. I actually think we need the financial revolution equivalent of the sexual revolution. We've got to stop thinking that talking about money is dirty. It should be behind closed doors. It's greedy if we want to make money. If we don't sort of lift those shrouds, I think the system is actually making it harder for people to have financial literacy. So I think it's not that big a leap to say, really, to get equality, we have to be able to talk about it. And whether it's the pay gap, whether it's understanding your super, whether it's having enough financial independence to know that you can leave a dangerous relationship, what is it? What is the language we've got to change? What makes it okay to stop saying sex, religion and politics and money should not be talked about in nice company? Actually, women wanting economic satisfaction is just as much part of a modern woman's life as expecting sexual safety, satisfaction, etc. So that's my take for today. a little bit cheeky, but I think we can do it.
But I think that's fair enough. I think it's when you know that there's a cohort of people, and then the majority of the population that are struggling in this space, unless you lift the veil on it, it's going to be very, very difficult to uncover. Now, Rachel, I am going to go to you because I know that in the businesses that you support, you've got some really key examples of businesses you've supported that do make a difference in this space as well. So I'm really interested in you to share some of those examples.
So I love what you said, Nicola, because it's definitely about being able to talk about money, and one of our companies is called HEX, H-E-X, and they help high school students and university students with their innovative education programs with a specific module on money. It's around financial literacy. It's talking about the history of money, our relationship with money, how to talk about money, and to understand spending, saving, debt, and really understanding how you make good financial decisions for your future. And they're being rolled out to all Year 10 girls at Camberwell Girls Grammar. Port Melbourne Secondary College also has their content, and they've been approved by the South Australian, Queensland, Northern Territory government to be recognised learning. The challenge is that it's not compulsory today in schools, and so teachers and principals are overwhelmed with trying to get aligned with test scores and things that don't necessarily make sure that high school leavers are equipped for the real world. And so those misaligned incentives mean that it has to be a commitment by that principal or that teacher to really drive that program through so that these kids are learning about money in the early days. And I think that's a real challenge, but I hope with programs such as HEX that more and more kids are learning about how to talk about money and how to make good financial decisions as they enter the real world.
And Georgie, it's a really practical thing we can all commit to doing as well, you know, in our own networks, with our own families and friends, with our own staff, you know, every conversation, you know, the shock when young people have their respected kind of elders, I hate being in that category, but their elders, you know, talking about what they earn, talking about what different jobs pay, talking about what their entitlement should be, talking about investments. These are things that, you know, normally don't really get talked about, and young people are ready for it. They're just often not really, don't think that's appropriate to ask the question, so we can lead it, and we can all easily do that, and it can reverberate out amongst the community, as well as supporting programs and doing it in a much more thorough community-wide way. I think International Women's Day, you sometimes feel a bit helpless about the terrible stats. This is a practical thing we can all play a role in.
I agree. I think it's fundamentally important, and it's also about making it a bit of fun, right? This is a really, really dry area, and it always astounds me when I go to the Melbourne Cup in November, and a whole lot of people that we would class as financially illiterate are totally able to understand how to place a bet on Sportsbet in a really complicated manner. And I think there is something in that about how dry, how boring, how legalistic we make this, that we overcomplicate it to almost count women out, not in. And that doesn't take a legislative change or a regulatory change. And so I think hearing, Rachel, from you that there are businesses out there trying to make a change, Nicola, from you that in the financial community there are women-led businesses now that are really trying to take a lead in the advocacy space. And then, Cathy, from you, on the ground, what a difference it's actually going to make at the grassroots level. It gives me a little bit of comfort today, but I think it's also a moment for everyone in the audience to say, what role are you going to play this year? Because it's not enough to come to a lunch. There are absolutely no cupcakes here. You all might have noticed. It's not enough to come to a lunch. It's enough when you understand that International Women's Day is actually about counting women into a conversation in a way that you just haven't noticed before. Something that will actually make a difference to the whole productivity of the country. I'm going to leave it to each of you to have one last remark. Who would like to lead off, if someone would like to lead off?
Sure. I mean, I think I didn't probably emphasise enough the joy of working in organisations that are led by women and the space that they can create for other women. And I think, again, male allies and all of us can bring another voice to the table when you're in a meeting, when someone's too shy to put their view forward, when someone hasn't had a chance to speak, you can help them come into that conversation, you can amplify it. at every business I've been in, if we have presenters, particularly if they're service providers, accounting firms, big banks, whatever, coming, and they come with a group of 3 men to present,
Yeah.
I'm now calling that out. Like, we
Yeah.
are past time on that. And so now if people want to bid for audit work, if they want to bid for consulting work, if they want to be the bank, that they need to be promoting women, they need to bring them, they need to be visible, they need to be at these board tables. And it is really good when you work with businesses led by women who get that.
Yep.
And it's actually also super satisfying when they're led by men and you can help them change and see why that's important too. So I'd love to see more and more of that.
Absolutely. Cathy?
I'd like to encourage everybody to have a look at Deloitte Access Economics and Australian Investing in Women's report on breaking the norm, because we have made lots of progress, but we've still all got biases that we apply in our individual lives that we're then finding in our systems, in our institutions around gender, that are really locking in some of the things that are holding us back. We've produced one report around that, and we're producing a second one that's going to focus on how we can break down some of these gender norms. So if you're looking for a bit of a toolkit on what you can take back into your workplace, look out for that in May. I really commend it to you, and we've got to start to continue to break some of those biases that we bring to the way we think about gender.
Oh, thanks, that's really helpful. Rachel?
Another report I'd point people towards is the What Women Want Work report by Work 180. So another one of our portfolio companies, they're helping women be empowered to find workplaces that work for them. So really about improving policies, introducing things like menopause policies, flexible working, parental leave. You know, at any one time, 25% of the workforce is experiencing menopausal symptoms, and there are no companies really out there that have a menopause policy. So really thinking about things like that. Work 180, I think, is a leader in that space, but that report just highlights things that you can look at to support women in the workforce.
Okay, well, I'm going to wrap it up on stage here, but I am going to ask these women to stay around for the next few minutes so that if they're in the room and you've heard some things that you want to hear expand on, please do come down and grab them for a minute. But I would like to thank everybody in the room for spending this afternoon with us. It's been a great day from my perspective. Thank you.